No one truly believed the end would come in silence. Humanity had always imagined its final days would arrive with sirens and fire, screaming skies, and noble last stands. But when it did come, the end was quiet, eerily, devastatingly quiet. The sky didn't turn red. The earth didn't shatter. There was no invasion fleet hovering over every capital. There was only the slow, methodical unraveling of everything we thought made us untouchable. It began with communications. One by one, satellites went dark. Then it was the orbital defense arrays, disabled remotely without a single shot fired. Then power grids, transportation networks, supply chains, not all at once. It was a drip. A leak, a soft hum in the background that grew louder with each passing day until humanity realized it had already been undone from within. The attackers were not what we expected. They weren't monstrous or grotesque, nor did they revel in chaos. They called themselves the HFY, a race not of conquest but of finality. They were old, older than our understanding of time. Their technology didn't glitter or roar, it whispered, it flowed. Their ships were dark monoliths shaped like stars that had forgotten how to shine. They did not speak with us. They did not give us reason. To them, we were an unfinished experiment, a species born to burn itself out. And so they came not to fight, but to cleanse. They came to finish what they believed the universe should have never allowed to begin. Within the first cycle of their arrival, every planetary defense failed. Earth's surface was scorched not in one brutal blast, but with calculated precision. Cultural centers, data cores, genetic repositories targeted and deleted. Cities vanished beneath seamless folds of gravity reversal, where the ground turned inside out and swallowed its own existence. Oceans turned acidic and bloomed with gray-red storms. Even the sky changed. Our blue atmosphere, once thick with life, dimmed into a pale, sickly yellow. In 72 hours, 70% of the human race was gone, vaporized, erased, forgotten. The rest? Scattered to ruins, forced underground, into the crust, into the deep black beyond the stars. It wasn't a war. It was a verdict, the government's. That remained, fractured and leaderless, became echoes of authority. Broadcasts from surviving outposts were short, panicked, and repeated one message: humanity is not dead. Humanity is not finished, but few believed it. The silence from the rest of the world spoke louder than any signal. Entire continents were reduced to digital ghosts. Machines stopped humming. The stars above grew colder, indifferent. People stopped hoping. And yet, in that stillness, something ancient stirred, not technology, not military genius, but something older. Something buried deep within the marrow of our kind defiance. It started in the rubble of Lisbon, where a boy no older than 10 climbed the jagged remains of a cathedral and, with nothing but chalk, wrote one sentence on the cracked dome: "We are not done." That sentence was broadcast across a hijacked HFY signal array 6 hours later, seen by survivors on 3 continents and 2 lunar colonies. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a strategy. It was a seed. In Tokyo's ash-choked underlevels, a retired surgeon who had lost both legs began building field med units from scrap metal and repurposed nanobots. In what was left of Cairo, 3 blind artists taught survivors to etch messages into metal, sending them on the wind like prayers. In Canada's frozen mountains, a small village broadcast a repeating loop of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony to no one, refusing to let the stars hear only silence. Across the ruins, the few who survived began to understand something powerful. The HFY had made one critical error. In erasing humanity's structures, they believed they had erased humanity itself. But humans were never about buildings or satellites or codes. We were about meaning, about moments, about memory. Our strength was not in our machines. It was in our stories. And now those stories lived in the minds and hands of the broken, the forgotten, the lost. The HFY believed they had killed our roots, but they had only scattered our seeds. And in that darkness, those seeds began to grow. In the orbital wreckage around Saturn, a research team thought dead returned. They had gone dark for weeks. Presumed lost, but they hadn't died. They had gone silent to listen, to trace the energy patterns of the K-Sharon network. They emerged not just alive, but with knowledge, maps of enemy positions, algorithms that could disrupt their signal frequencies, designs for weapons made not of steel or plasma, but resonance, sound, frequency, ideas. They called it ecotech. It wasn't about overwhelming power, it was about amplification. A whisper could shatter a hull, a song could crash a fleet. A single thought, tuned to the right frequency, could be more devastating than 1,000 nukes, humanity's first. True counterattack wasn't a battle. It was a broadcast. A single word, pulsed across every K-Sharon node like a heartbeat. Remember, they didn't understand it. They couldn't translate it. But it spread, disrupting their neural grids, fracturing their swarm logic. For the first time in their existence, they hesitated. Not out of fear, but confusion. What was being remembered? Who was remembering it? They didn't know, and that not knowing broke their rhythm, gave us space, time, enough for the resistance to move, to grow, to become more than a whisper. Bunkers became laboratories. Wreckage became supply chains. Abandoned colony ships were salvaged and turned into mobile strike platforms. Eyes that had been considered obsolete were resurrected and rebuilt, coded with the memories of dead poets, teachers, warriors. We stopped trying to reclaim what was lost. We started becoming something new. Not humanity as it was, but humanity as it had always meant to be, united not by borders or laws, but by the certainty that we do not die quietly. We do not end, we evolve. And as our networks reformed, as our broken voices began to sync again, one idea echoed louder than all the rest. This isn't the end. This is the ignition. The ignition point didn't come from a general speech or a final weapon or even a victorious moment. It came from something smaller, something nearly invisible. A memory packet 3.8 kilobytes in size, encoded inside a child's lullaby, intercepted from a downed K-Sharon drone that had unknowingly recorded it. The lullaby was traced back to a refugee enclave orbiting Europa's shattered moon. A woman, once a linguist, now a caretaker, had sung it to keep orphans calm as they floated in darkness, with the stars too distant to offer comfort. The song wasn't just a tune, it was a cipher. Inside it was everything: harmonic frequencies that disrupted K-Sharon neural loops, embedded rhythms that overloaded their pattern recognition cores, and most importantly, a word structure that couldn't be interpreted by any alien algorithm. It was raw emotion encoded in grief. The 3.8 kilobytes packet became the foundation for humanity's most effective weapon, the SolNet protocol. SolNet wasn't a bomb, it wasn't a gun, it was a transmission, a song, a prayer, a scream, a broadcast of everything we were: our love, our rage, our suffering, our refusal to disappear. It didn't seek to destroy K-Sharon vessels through brute force. It made them feel us, it made them remember us. It made them experience, for the first time in their long clinical history, what it meant to exist as something imperfect, but alive. When the first SolNet pulse hit one of their harvesting monoliths above Ganymede, the ship didn't explode. It spasmed, it faltered. It wept light like blood and fell from orbit with a sound no one heard, but everyone felt. It was the first time humanity watched a K-Sharon ship die not by firepower, but by empathy weaponized as fury. From that moment on, resistance spread like wildfire through vacuum. Not organized armies, there were none. What arose were fragments, shards of what humanity had been, now reforged into something far more dangerous. Resistance cells called themselves names that no longer carried rank but meaning. The forgotten choir of the pulse-burn. The children of the burned sky, the continuum echo. They weren't just fighters, they were messengers. Carriers of human memory, walking vessels of the idea that we had not only survived, we had begun again. SolNet transmitters were welded into scrap armor affixed to old satellites, embedded into the bones of starships long thought lost. Every beat of their hearts was broadcast. Every breath was a war drum. The K-Sharon responded not with surrender but escalation. They unleashed logic storms, fractal mind weapons that fractured memories, dissolved cognitive threads, turned coherent thoughts into static. They targeted not our bodies, but our ability to remember who we were, but even that failed. Because our minds broke, yes, but when we rebuilt them stronger. Memory became myth. And myth was immune to their logic. In the ruins of what was once the Martian capital, survivors tattooed their family trees on their skin. In the drifting husk of the Venusian orbital arc, engineers recited Shakespeare's sonnets into the coolant systems, embedding love into the circuits. Even dreams became resistance coded into AI sublayers, turned into traps that caused K-Sharon drones to self-destruct after hearing the phrase, "I remember." What followed was not a war in the traditional sense. It was a contest of wills. Of belief systems, of presence. They had precision. We had persistence. They had logic. We had legend. They came as conquerors and left as witnesses to something they couldn't kill: purpose. Humanity didn't just hold the line, we bled into it, infused it, transformed it. Our dead became circuits. Our stories became software. Our love became algorithms of vengeance. The K-Sharon learned the price of underestimating a species whose greatest strength was not its dominance, but its defiance. The turning point came during the siege of Cinder's Richa synthetic planetoid, built from the corpses of 15 destroyed K-Sharon capital ships. It was meant to be our tomb, a trap, a final exclamation mark in the sentence of our extinction. But humanity didn't die there. We flourished. The refugees who had been bait became engineers overnight. They rewired K-Sharon systems using resonance feedback. They turned the planet's magnetic core into a massive SolNet amplifier. When the enemy returned expecting a massacre, they were greeted by sound, by light, by memory. Not weapons, but waves of humanity's deepest truths, broadcast through every meter of atmosphere. The sky rippled with stories. The air sang of our pain. The K-Sharon ships didn't flee, they shut down, they became inert. Not destroyed, but silenced. Disarmed not by bullets, but by remembrance. Cinder's reach became a beacon, a sanctuary, a forge. From its orbit, transmissions were sent across space to any human still alive, still listening. We are not remnants, we are resurgence. Colonies once hiding in silence emerged, sleeper vessels awakened. AI cores long dormant rebooted, synced, updated with SolNet data. And for the first time since Earth fell, humanity didn't feel hunted. We felt seen, not by the stars, not by the enemy, but by each other. And as we rose, the K-Sharon fell into disarray. Their command clusters fractured. Their fleets stopped coordinating. A signal echoed through their hierarchy, a phrase, spoken not in language but in pulse. They remember. It terrified them, not because they feared us, but because they feared what we were becoming. We were no longer biological. We were no longer defined by skin or shape. We were memory given mass. We were purpose wrapped in pain. We were the past. Refusing to stay silent. By the time their last fleet turned and ran, the universe had already changed. The K-Sharon had thought themselves eternal. Now they were myths, like the monsters under a child's bed, only dangerous if you let them define your story. And we were just getting started, not as survivors, not as victims, but as the authors of a new age, one where existence wasn't granted. It was seized, one where identity wasn't coded, it was carried. One where loss wasn't the end, but the fuel for something far more dangerous. By the time the war ended, humanity was no longer the species that had first looked to the stars in wonder. We had been burned, broken, scattered, and reshaped by silence and fire. Our Earth was a husk, a sacred graveyard floating in the dark. Our governments were gone, replaced by coalitions forged through survival. Our homes were debris repurposed into arcs. But none of it mattered. Because the heart of humanity, our story, our soul was alive. The K-Sharon had tried to erase us. They succeeded in burning down the house. But they forgot. We are the fire that built it. In the aftermath, we gathered not to celebrate, but to remember. Across what remained of our colonies and stations, new traditions emerged, not of conquest or victory, but of preservation. Memory became a sacrament. On the ringed station of Ecohold, orbiting what used to be Neptune, a single room was constructed, from alloyed K-Sharon armor and the bones of dead human vessels. Its walls were etched with the names of the last 10 million who died during the collapse, not alphabetically, not by region, but by the order in which they were remembered. Every time someone, somewhere, spoke the name of the lost, it appeared there in light. That room became the pulse of the continuum, a shrine not to death, but to the unyielding act of remembering. We didn't rebuild Earth, not because we couldn't, but because we chose not to. Earth was no longer a home, it had become something more. A scar, a symbol, a monument to the cost of forgetting what it meant to be united. Its orbit was protected now not by weapons but by presence. Hundreds of vessels from every surviving human lineage hovered above it silently in shifts. They called themselves the Vigil, no orders, no chain of command, just a promise. Never again would humanity go blind while staring at stars. Never again would we trade meaning for comfort. Never again would we let our divisions make us deaf to the sound of our own extinction. From the ashes, humanity became a whisper on the wind of the galaxy, not a scream, not a roar. A whisper, soft, but impossible to silence. And whispers, when spoken together, become songs. The SoulNet evolved. It became more than a weapon. It became a shared resonance between human minds across systems. Emotions could be transmitted, understood, felt grief, joy, hope, warning. We were no longer individuals trying to speak over the void. We were a choir, no longer billions of fragmented lives. We were one memory scattered, yes, but fused by fire and resolve. We did not speak the same language, but we all felt the same pulse. Alien civilizations, once distant observers, began to emerge, not to conquer, not to fear, but to learn. For the first time, humanity was not seen as dangerous, but as sacred, not because we had power, but because we had endured. They called us the Flameborn, the remembered, the forged. Some even knelt when we arrived, knelt not in worship, but in recognition, because the galaxy had seen thousands of empires rise and fall, but it had only ever seen one species walk through extinction, dragging its soul behind it like a banner, and come out the other side stronger. In the centuries that followed, we didn't build an empire. We built something harder, a promise. A structureless federation bound not by law, but by story. New humans, those born after the fire, were raised on the memories of those who walked before. They didn't worship the past. They carried it like armor. Every child knew how to recite the final broadcast. Every teenager memorized the Cinder's Reach Requiem. And every adult carried, somewhere on their skin, the name of someone they never met, a stranger whose memory lived on because to be human now meant to carry the weight of those who came before, and in all that time the K-Sharon never returned. Not because we destroyed them, but because we changed the game. They came to wipe us away like ink on a page. But they failed to understand one truth. We were never just the ink. We were the story. And you cannot erase a story once it's been told across 1,000 hearts, spoken through blood, sung through bone. So when people asked, what happened when we lost everything? The answer became simple. That was when we began, because the fire didn't end us. The silence didn't stop. The void didn't consume us. They thought they ended humanity, but when all was lost, humanity was just getting started.